Celilo Falls is an ancient site. It's been inhabited for 11,000 years, and the name itself is also ancient. It's an Indian name. This is the 1880 census for Celilo. There were 367 people living there, of which 43 were Chinese. But Indians weren't enumerated in any census until 1900. This is the first Indian census, and you can see Tommy Thompson is there. He's the chief and also the head of his household. I can see that his daughter is young Liz, and his mother is Crazy Liz. This is Indian humor being played out 113 years after this was enumerated. Every year, the spring floods would come along and wash everything away. So all the platforms and this bridge would be dismantled and hauled away on trucks and brought back and rebuilt the next year. So we see the same lumber being used over and over again, but the supports are different. That's the only way that you can date unidentified pictures. And this is the area, this is a movie film of that area. This is the Horseshoe Falls area. You can see how much mist and how much water is in the air and how turbulent the water is. This is where the Columbia River turned over on its side. The footbridge was replaced by cable cars. You can see a cable car going from the mainland to Chinook Rock in this film clip. Dip netting was the way that Indians most used to collect fish, spearing being one of the other ways, but these people are using movable dip nets. And there were two kinds of dip nets, a stationary one that stayed in one place and movable ones that people would sweep through. These worked best here because the water was very turbulent and the fish couldn't see. So this kind of net, the way it worked is that the net was attached to the hoop with rings and it was secured by a leather tong. When the fish struck the net, the tong pulled free and the net would purse around the fish, making it impossible for the fish to get away. The pole would just be lifted hand over hand up to the platform to collect the fish. This catch is typical of Columbia River salmon, born before the dams were built. Fish were big and rich in oil because they traveled 1,000 miles to spawn in Canada. The size of a fish is proportional to the length of their journey to spawn. The largest of the fish became extinct when the Grand Coulee Dam was built in upstate Washington and blocked 1,000 miles of Canadian river. The last public appearance of Chief Tommy Thompson, photographed here with his wife Flora, taken as they were arriving at Celilo for the feast of the first salmon in May 1957. This is after the falls had already been submerged. Thompson came to say farewell to the salmon and to the falls at the annual festival. After the ceremonies, he returned to his room at the Hanby Nursing Home in Hood River, and according to newspaper accounts, on the night of his return he had nightmares which caused him to climb over the guardrails of his bed, and he fell and fractured his right hip. Surgeons put a steel pin in his hip, but the next year's salmon feast went on without him. The elderly chief never personally attended or went to Celilo again. He lived another 2 years, and he passed away in 1959. I think that, all the people whose countenances we've seen in the slides that have passed on, and Celilo Falls itself is submerged, permanently underwater. But, the dam can't live forever. And one day it's going to rise again. Thank you.
I think I felt really honored to do this because I think it's important. People need to know about how important Salila was to our people. The importance of how our way of life was and how it was destroyed for the Taos Dam. A way of life that we still carry on today. Our salmon is part of our sacred foods. We live for, we struggle for, we survive for. So we always have our salmon, our first foods is the salmon, the roots, and the huckleberries. This is part of the petroglyphs that were still along the river, and I think the only one that's still standing is the She Who Watches on the Washington side. And this is part of the petroglyphs that went under when the falls went down. This picture here, I was really glad to get back. It's called the Wind Rock. And the purpose of that was we needed to have more salmon for our feast. So my grandfather and my grandmother, they would go up there and pray and leave a gift of something so that we would have more fish for the feast. And if the wind blew, then we were going to have more salmon. That was just part of our culture thing that they always did. I was telling Tim about this rock formation right here. Anybody knows it's the shape of a salmon? There was a story about this. My grandmother told me that when we didn't have enough salmon for the feast, Coyote gave himself up, went up to the hills, talked to the Creator, and asked that he would give himself up to be a salmon to feed the people of the river. So when he turned himself into a salmon, he came down the hill. But when he got down there was a lot of salmon in the river, so he just stayed there to watch over the people. So it's still there. This headdress here, it is still at the Warm Springs Market in Warm Springs. So Grandma had to trade that to get salmon for the salmon feast, so it's still up there. But the only reason she did that was so that she could feed the people, because in those days we didn't have money. We always bartered, we always traded foods for roots or whatever, any kind of material, stuff like that to feed the people. They had to wear those ropes or they couldn't fish at all. So it was part of the rules and regulations of fishing. So without those ropes, they'd probably fall in. So, yeah, I was telling Tim, I says, every time I would drive to Salila, I was wanting to hear the roar of the falls and the mist on my face, the smell of salmon. This here I don't think they do anymore, they called Waluksha. It's where they play cards. I think it was the first casino. This is the original way we cook salmon, because it's better tasting that way. We still practice that yet. So I would invite you guys to our salmon feast in April. Come check it out. You can taste it right now. Smell it too. Yeah, this is the old way how everybody was just involved. They just get their dresses and put the aprons on, and they just knew what they had to do. And this here is the salmon feast, is where we put the tule mats on the ground, just on the ground, no floor. And we put the plates and everything, then we put water in the cups, just the bottom of the cups, where we give thanks for the foods provided by Mother Earth. And then we eat, they sing, and then we take little bits of food for the spirit. Little pieces of salmon, deer meat, roots, and huckleberries. And then we give thanks, and then we eat in silence to enjoy the foods. And then at the end of the meal, we drink water for giving thanks for the foods, so that we still do that. Whenever we have a feast is what we do. We practice that yet. I think most tribes do that. So. But we have a lot of people that come from all over Canada, Montana, Idaho, Utah. We had a lot of people from different areas. We even had some people come from New Zealand just to come to the salmon feast.